Okay, well, we'll try to keep everyone on time tonight. We have some good presentations ahead, and we're excited to kick off our quarterly Boston Food Access Council meeting. Thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Lauren Palumbo. My pronouns are she, hers, and I serve as co-chair of the steering committee alongside Annalise Shepard. I want to introduce you all to our steering committee members who you'll hear from throughout the evening in a few different outlets. So we are, as I just mentioned, Annalise Shepard, who is here tonight as a co-chair of the steering committee, myself. We also have Marcos Beleche, Joy Gary, Nicole St. Louis, Catherine Drennan-Lynn, Megan Huang, Maritza Rosario, and our newest steering committee member who was elected in March, Christine E.M. Keller. I also want to shout out, because this will be our last public meeting with our current intern, Megan Hoyne-Wingate, who's wrapping up with us this month and who has been an incredible steward of this work over the past few months, and we will dearly miss her. But thank you to all of you for joining us this evening. I am going to run through the agenda for the evening, and then I'm going to kick it off to one of our steering committee members to walk through the norms for this evening's meeting. So we will start off in a moment with some webinar rules, our BFAC values statement, and also our meeting norms for any BFAC public meeting. From there, we will hand the mic over to Vicki from the Mass Law Reform Institute, who is going to give some updates on federal policy changes relating to issues around food access. We will then have Rachel Zach and DJ from the Greater Boston Food Bank, who are joining us to share some data from a recent study that they have done around food insecurity in Massachusetts. Following that, we're going to have some breakout rooms. These are informal. It's really just a chance for us to all kind of do some informal networking and getting to know each other, because we haven't gotten to see each other in person for quite some time. And we just want to get a sense of who is in the virtual room with us tonight. We will follow that with some updates from our various working groups within BFAC. And we'll close the meeting out with some updates from Project Bread, and then some next steps that you can all take on if you choose to stay engaged with the Boston Food Access Council. I will just note that if we say BFAC, that is shorthand for Boston Food Access Council. I know sometimes that can be a little confusing, but it is a mouthful. So bear with us throughout the evening. I will just call out, you'll notice in the chat and at the bottom of the screen is the message to please mark yourself present by completing that attendance form that is linked in the chat. We will download attendance from Zoom, but this is just a helpful way to make sure that we know that you were here, because again, meeting attendance does play a role in who is considered a voting member of Boston Food Access Council. So when we have elections at the end of this year, your meeting attendance counts towards that voting membership. So with that said, I am going to hand things over to Christine, who's going to share with you Zoom rules and some meeting norms.
All right, good evening, everyone. So for meeting on Zoom tonight, we have a couple of ground rules that we'd like to adhere to. Please use the sign up form in the chat to mark your attendance, as Lauren just mentioned. You can add your name and organization, your pronouns, and your neighborhood or community in the chat box as well. Today's meeting is being recorded, so we ask that everyone keep themselves muted at all times unless you are called on to speak. Please use the chat box for asking questions during presentations, and we will be leaving time at the end of each section for questions and answers. We will use the chat feature to share links and or other information throughout the webinar. And in small group discussions, please ensure all voices are heard. Spanish translation is available as well.
Yeah, can we pause there for just 1 second? Because Terrence, who is our translator for this evening, is here. Terrence, apologies for this sort of behind the scenes work here, everyone, but Terrence is asking me if I will be putting on the Spanish channel, and it should have been on. Does anyone need Spanish translation? Terrence, if you can unmute yourself and ask that in Spanish, it might be.
Si alguien que para esta reunión necesita interpretación, estoy aquí, si podemos arreglar los puntos técnicos. Si necesita la interpretación, sí se puede identificar. O lo puede escribir en el chat también.
Terrence, maybe we can have you ask again in a couple minutes.
Okay.
And in the past, we haven't had many folks that have needed it, but we want to make sure that we're continuing to ask as folks continue to join. So I'm going to go ahead and mute myself and let Christine continue with the meeting norms, but thank you for that.
Thanks. We also adhere to some meeting norms at BFAC, and we would like to share those tonight. We will work to create a safe space for people with lived experience and recognize all it takes to speak truth to power. Hear feedback, critique, and experiences as opportunities for growth and not as personal offenses. Everyone is encouraged to participate. You may be asked to share what you think, or we may ask for comments from those who haven't spoken. It is always okay to pass when you are asked to share a comment. When you speak, be brief and to the point. When you speak, state your name and where you live, working group, and public meetings alike. Treat others with respect as you disagree or agree and value what's being shared. When in doubt, ask for clarification. Every participant's voice will be respected. Step up and step back. Allow space for others to contribute. Always remember that we are working within a broken food system, and any critique of the emergency food system is a reflection of that and not a personal critique or someone's work or intent. Our value statement. BFAC brings together residents, activists, thought leaders, organizations, farmers, researchers, and other diverse stakeholders to address equitable food access in the city of Boston, recognizing its role in the larger Massachusetts food system. BFAC asserts that consistent access to healthy, nutritious, affordable, and culturally appropriate food is a basic human right. BFAC seeks to create an anti-racist, inclusive, and participatory culture of learning by building trusting and transformational relationships within the community by engaging residents with lived experience in hunger. BFAC aims to ground itself in a power-sharing model that honors and values all voices at the table, treating each with dignity and respect, and is trauma-informed and self-critical. BFAC seeks to offer a space to help provide an equitable, community-centered platform for food access, affordability, and economic opportunity.
Thanks, Christine. Terrence, can we put you on the spot one last time, or maybe one more time, and we'll maybe do it again in a little bit?
Ok, de nuevo, si alguien quiere la interpretación en español, entonces si se puede identificar o en el chat o levantando la mano. Ok.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Vicki from MLRI. Vicki, if you are here, please go ahead and unmute yourself and I'll advance slides as you need.
I am here, Lauren. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. Just as a quick note of background, and thanks for sharing those norms. That was very helpful. As this is my first time joining one of these meetings. So my name is Vicki Negus. I work at the Massachusetts Law Reform Institute. We're the statewide poverty law center in Massachusetts. So we serve as a backup center for local legal aid programs. And we also work on systemic advocacy and a whole range of issues with a focus on racial equity and justice, economic justice, and kind of general tackling of problems that impact low-income households across the state and also in some instances on a national level. So that is what we do. Lauren and others had asked me to just share some quick information around kind of the current lay of the land when it comes to the pandemic and federal nutrition programs. So that is what I'm here to share. And I'm always really happy to adjust what I'm sharing if folks have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat and I can kind of answer them as we go. We've all spent a lot of time on Zoom the past year plus, so I always welcome those questions and would rather not just be like a floating talking head. So I think, yeah, Lauren, if you could advance the slide, that'd be great. So as I just shared, Mass Law Reform provides statewide advocacy and leadership in advancing laws, policies, and practices that secure economic, racial, and social justice for low-income people and communities. So that is what we do. And I focus on all things SNAP and food security, along with cash welfare through the Department of Transitional Assistance. So wanted to go through just kind of sharing generally what has happened with SNAP due to the pandemic. I'm sure folks are, familiar in general with SNAP, the impacts that it has in Massachusetts and the critical need that families across the country and in the state have to put food on the table, and the kind of skyrocketing of food insecurity rates across the country due to the pandemic. Those food insecurity rates have started to come down a little bit in light of the pretty significant federal kind of different federal aid packages, the stimulus checks, and an expansion and increase in SNAP benefit amounts. So the kind of variety of improvements along with pandemic EBT, which I'll speak about in a second, the kind of broad set of federal policy changes have resulted in a decrease in food insecurity, which is heartening to see, but rates are still higher, which comes as no surprise to anyone on this call, than pre-pandemic. So the kind of core pieces about SNAP that have changed on a federal level and are in place here in Massachusetts are that there's a 15% boost to the SNAP benefit amount. That 15% boost is in place through September, unless Congress takes action to extend it. The second really critical SNAP boost that's in place is that all households who receive a SNAP benefit are getting an additional boost up of at least $95 a month. This boost up is called an emergency allotment. We call it an extra emergency pandemic related boost. Many households, about half of all households in Massachusetts that get SNAP are getting more than $95 a month, but all households are getting at least $95 a month. That boost is in place. Right now, we don't know yet when it will end, but it has been in place since March of 2020. In addition to the actual boost to the dollar amounts that are being issued to families, it's currently easier to access SNAP benefits as a result of different pandemic rule changes. There's no application interview, no requirement to talk to someone at the Department of Transitional Assistance when applying for SNAP, unless there are proofs or information that is required to make a decision about eligibility and that information is missing. So if the department has everything they need, they don't have to talk to the applicant, they go ahead and process the case. This reduces one of the biggest access barriers that families have historically faced in accessing SNAP. The second kind of big thing to just keep in mind is that there's a reduction in the paperwork that's required for households to reprove eligibility. So basically what I often say is that it's easier to get on and stay on if you're eligible than it was pre-pandemic. There are expanded eligibility rules in place due to the December COVID legislation, federal legislation that expands rules for eligibility for low-income college students who are typically subject to some kind of punitive restrictions in SNAP, and the time limit and work rules that are in place in normal times for certain non-disabled childless adults are also suspended. So there's a variety of kind of really critical changes in place, and most of these changes are in place at least for the likely through the end of the year, potentially longer. They are tied to the status of, in some cases, the federal public health declaration and in others, both the state and the federal declaration. So more to come on the status of each of these kind of changes. I wanted to just kind of put some dollar amounts to what I'm talking about, because it's hard to say a 15% boost without giving any context for what that actually means for families. So the current monthly SNAP benefit amount for most families, or many families, is this middle column, the maximum benefit. For a family of 3, all households in Massachusetts who are getting SNAP, all families of 3 are getting at least $616 a month. Some families who are particularly low income, they are the lowest income families, or the families with the highest kind of costs of living. Those families are getting this $95 plus up, so they're getting up to $711 a month. All right, Lauren, the next slide, please. Thank you. So in addition to these pretty monumental and critical changes to SNAP, there has been the creation of a brand new benefit program, essentially a brand new program called Pandemic EBT. I imagine many of you are pretty familiar with PEBT by this point, but PEBT was designed and initially set up in the spring of 2020 to help replace the cost of lost school meals for school-aged kids who are eligible for free or reduced price meals, but have been learning remotely or learning in certain hybrid models. Recently, last fall, in the fall of 2020, Pandemic EBT was expanded to also include kids under 6 who are part of a household that's enrolled in SNAP. So it doesn't just cover the school-aged kids anymore. It's a critical nutrition benefit for, we call the 0 to 5, kids under 6 as well, as long as they're tethered to a SNAP household. There's been some really, oh, sorry, Lauren. There's been some pretty exciting news on PEBT. The state issued a press release Friday before Memorial Day about summer PEBT. This summer, all kids who are free or reduced price eligible, regardless of their learning model, so all the kids who've gone back in person to school in the past couple of months, and all of the kids who have been in kind of different learning models over the chaos of the past school year, all of those kids will get a summer Pandemic EBT benefit. In addition, all of the kids who are enrolled in SNAP and are under 6 will also get the summer PEBT benefit. So that'll be it will be $375 per child for the summer months, which is fantastic. DTA will be issuing that out in 2 payments. masspEBT.org is a really fantastic resource for PEBT. There's a whole variety of outreach materials and information that is in multiple languages. It's in all the outreach materials are in, I believe, 11 languages. So that's a critical tool for distributing information in communities and making sure folks kind of have a sense about what's going on. And so on I think the last slide, the second to last slide, I wanted to give us the sense of the federal nutrition dollars that are flowing into Massachusetts through SNAP in Pandemic EBT, because I think when we are kind of thinking about the food system in the state and the ability of families in our communities, and certainly in Boston, to put food on the table, it's useful to have a sense of scope pre to during pandemic. So for SNAP, currently Massachusetts is receiving about $2 billion a year in federal SNAP benefits. That's because of the boost up in the benefit amount that I spoke to before. Each month, it's about $100 million in like what I would call normal SNAP, and then about $80 million a month that comes in because of that boosted SNAP benefit, those emergency allotments due to the pandemic. So that's a pretty huge increase. Our SNAP caseload in Massachusetts has also gone up 26% since the pandemic began. So we're now over 560,000 households in the state. So it's about 1 in 8 residents of the state receive SNAP. And you can actually kind of track out what's happened like in your local community, DTA post zip code data. So you can see, you know, in a discrete zip code, like what was the caseload size in February or March of 2020, and what has happened since then. It's a pretty striking increase. It's not at all surprising, but it is pretty stunning. It's a wildly unprecedented increase in need and an increase to the caseload. To give it a little bit of context, during the Great Recession, we had a significant increase in the caseload, but it increased over the span of 4 or 5 years. And so to have this massive increase in a year is just unprecedented. Summer PEBT will bring $250 million of federal food dollars to residents of the Commonwealth for the summer months. And PEBT, prior to this upcoming summer, has brought in over $400 million in federal funds since last spring to almost 700,000 kids. It's about 688,000 kids. That includes the kids under 6 and also the school-aged kids. And I wanted to also share, because there's just so much happening right now. There's a lot happening on a federal level. There's a lot happening in Massachusetts. I wanted to just succinctly list out this is like a smattering of the key resources for low-income families at this point, with you know, kind of simple links for each of these core resources. I am quite sure I've missed really critical resources, but just in thinking earlier today about what to share with you all, I wanted to hone in on these because of the timely nature of a lot of them. So the first is just ensuring that folks who are eligible for but not receiving SNAP or cash assistance through the Department of Transitional Assistance apply as soon as possible. They can apply online, they can apply by phone, and there's more information at dtaconnect.com. I saw Project Red on the agenda. I don't know if anyone from Project Red is on, but I wanted to include the Project Red hotline as a really good place to go to get emergency food resources quickly. And then the next 3 items on this list are kind of time sensitive and currently really relevant. The first is finderfunds.org, which is a website that Mass Law Reform partnered with the Shaw Foundation, with Children's Health Watch, Greater Boston Legal Services, and MassCap to stand up a statewide website to connect low-income families with stimulus checks, the child tax credit, and the expanded EITC tax refunds as well. This is really critical because the lowest income families in our communities are often left out of this really robust federal relief because they haven't historically had to file a tax return. And currently the access point to those funds is by connecting to the IRS through a tax return. We launched Find Your Funds today, so we're really excited about it. We have a webinar next week, and I would recommend checking out the website. We also have outreach materials in 11 languages. So that's another really critical resource because SNAP and PEBT are just food dollars, and we know that families can't live on SNAP alone. So connecting folks to those federal dollars is critical. The other piece I wanted to mention is the emergency broadband benefit, which launched a few weeks ago. It's a federal benefit that provides up to $50 a month for internet and also provides help with paying for a computer or a tablet or a laptop. Folks have to apply for it in order to get that benefit. It's a pandemic-related benefit, and it's administered by the federal government. But again, folks do have to apply. Everybody who gets SNAP, everybody who gets free or reduced price meals, and folks who are in an array of other economic circumstances or connected to other benefit programs are eligible. So really encourage families to get that help with their internet costs. And then the last piece I wanted to mention, Mass Law Reform has been leading the charge on providing eviction legal aid assistance across the state. We have a statewide legal aid project to connect folks facing eviction with a legal aid attorney or a legal aid paralegal. And so you can learn more information and clients can connect with the program through evictionlegalhelp.org. So I know none of those are squarely in the federal food space, but because they're so timely and critical, I wanted to share those as well.
Thank you, Vicki. Would like to sort of open up to any questions because we have a couple minutes before moving on to the next presentation. And I know that was a lot of really helpful information, but I'm sure there might be some questions from the audience. So I want to give it a minute. And y'all, you can either drop your questions in the chat or if you want to unmute yourself and introduce yourself, you can also do it that way.
I also just realized I totally neglected to put my email on the slide, so I will plunk my email in the chat in case anyone has any questions.
So the question from Sarah Primo is the website again is findyourfunds.org.
Yes, it's findyourfunds.org. Like I said, there's outreach materials that are currently posted in 11 languages, and we're continuing to build out that website with additional resources and information. The focus of the website is to connect families with kind of options for how to get in a tax return, including connections to VITA sites across the state and kind of other resources to kind of get through the door of getting that tax refund filed. And it also provides kind of some myth busting and facts around like immigrant eligibility for the stimulus checks and how to deal with certain sticky situations that have come up a lot for folks.
And to answer the question that popped in the chat, will the presentation be available after the meeting? So yes, so first of all, if we have your contact information, if you're a BFAC member and you're on our mailing list, after every meeting, we will send around both a PDF of this presentation as well as the link to the recording of the meeting, which will be posted on our YouTube channel as well. So if you are, thank you, Megan, if you're not listed as a member and you think you might not be on our mailing list, if you haven't been getting emails from us, make sure you click that link that Megan just dropped into the chat. So, any other questions before we move on to the next presentation? Well, thank you so much, Vicki. This was super helpful. And thank you for sharing everything with us. And I'm sure folks learned quite a bit, so we quite appreciate that. So I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to actually switch to a different presentation. So bear with me for 1 second, but then I'm going to turn it over to Rachel at the Greater Boston Food Bank, and we will start sharing this presentation. Okay, Rachel, if you are here and want to unmute yourself.
Great. Thank you, Lauren. Thanks for having us to present on our research today. My name is Rachel Zach, and I'm an epidemiologist and senior data analyst on GBFB's business and data analytics team, and I'm presenting today with DJ. I don't know if you want to introduce yourself as well.
Sure. Hi, I'm DJ Taylorbaum, the Assistant Director of the Business and Data Analytics team.
Thanks. So we'll be presenting our findings on gaps in food access during the COVID pandemic in Massachusetts from GBFB's Massachusetts statewide survey on food access and food insecurity. This study was funded by the Hunger to Health Collaboratory and Stop and Shop, and it's an exciting project because it's the first study focused on food insecurity, food assistance use, and barriers to food assistance use conducted at the state level in Massachusetts during the COVID pandemic. So if you could go to the next slide, please. To begin, I'd like to provide you just with some background on the report and what we did. As GBFB wanted to better understand food insecurity, food assistance use, and barriers to use during the pandemic, we conducted a statewide survey of 3,000 adults living throughout Massachusetts. I think it's important to keep in mind that the survey was done at one point in time this past fall and early winter, from October 2020 to early January 2021, when food insecurity was likely at its peak in the state. The goals of the survey were to identify the prevalence of food insecurity in Massachusetts, to identify gaps and disparities in food assistance use in Massachusetts, and to develop data-driven recommendations to ensure that all have adequate access to food. On the next slide, which is about the group that we conducted the work with, we conducted this research as part of the National Food Access and COVID Research Team, which is known as NFACT. This is a group of researchers that came together at the beginning of the pandemic, and research is being conducted in 15 states. If you'd like to learn more, you can go to nfactresearch.org. Next, we'll review some of the key findings that have come out of our research. We all know that food insecurity was on the rise during the pandemic, and with our survey data, we were able to quantify how food insecurity has increased during the pandemic. We measured food insecurity using the 6-item USDA Household Food Security Survey module. And I want to mention that we collected data only at one point in time, which was during the pandemic. So the pre-pandemic data were collected retrospectively by asking people to recall their experiences in the 12 months before COVID. As shown in the top of this bar graph, we found that food insecurity increased from 19%, which is shown in the pink bar before the pandemic, to 30%, shown in the red bar during the pandemic. This represents a 55% increase in food insecurity. And if you click next for one more slide. As we dug into the data, we saw that there were large disparities in who was experiencing food insecurity. Black and Latinx adults were approximately twice as likely as white adults to be experiencing food insecurity, both before and during the pandemic. Additionally, households with children were approximately twice as likely as households without children to be experiencing food insecurity. We knew that these disparities existed, but these data demonstrate in more detail what we've been seeing on the ground. In addition to the quantitative data, we also collected quotes from study participants via the online survey, and the quotes have been helpful to give the data a human aspect, and we'll be sharing more quotes throughout the presentation. As I mentioned earlier, we have representation of people living throughout the state, and here's a quote from a mother in Somerville that speaks to how difficult it is to experience food insecurity. She shared, "It's been very hard as a pregnant mother trying to cook healthy meals. At times I try to eat smaller meals in order to save my food, and it's sad knowing I have to feed not only myself, but my baby." On the next slide, we looked at food assistance use among people facing food insecurity. And although we found that among the food insecure, a higher percentage of people are using a food assistance during the pandemic than before, there are still many people who are not using food assistance. We found that during the pandemic, only 32% of those experiencing food insecurity are using food pantries, only 46% are using SNAP, and only 55% are using either food pantries or SNAP. On the next slide, there's a quote from a single mother in Malden that speaks to the importance of food assistance programs and how many people may need to use multiple forms of food assistance to obtain enough food. She shared, "Food pantries and SNAP benefits have really helped my family through this pandemic, along with the extra PEBT benefits. Kids eat a lot, and I would never be able to support them and myself if I didn't have food stamps and food pantries." Next, I will speak in more detail about food assistance use and describe some of the barriers to use. As I previously mentioned, only about 1 in 3 adults experiencing food insecurity are using food pantries in Massachusetts. On the next slide, we have a graph showing the prevalence of food pantry use, both before and during the pandemic. According to our data, pantry use increased from 9% to 12% of the population during the pandemic. And if you click just one more slide, you can see that food pantry use was highest among people of color and households with children. We wanted to really understand what was preventing people from using food pantries. And so we asked questions on what were the barriers to food pantry use. So on the next slide, we show what some of the barriers are. We found that the key barriers to food pantry use among people reporting food insecurity but not using food pantries tended to be a desire for self-reliance, shame and fear of stigma, and lack of awareness of food pantry availability. We can go back to the next slide for a second. So, for example, 74% of people who reported food insecurity but were not accessing food pantries said that a reason was that they wanted to support themselves instead of using food pantries. There was also lack of awareness about the program. 62% reported they didn't know when they were open. And then there was an issue around stigma and shame, with 58% of people feeling too embarrassed to use, and 57%, and then an issue about people feeling they might not be eligible, even though usually anyone can be eligible to use a food pantry, with 57% saying they were worried they had too many personal assets. On the next slide, we have a quote from a single mother from Malden that speaks to the stigma and sense of shame that some people feel or face when using food pantries. This food pantry user shared, "I have been using food pantries since I was young. My mother taught me how to do it. They are very helpful when you're having a hard time. I have met people in my life who are embarrassed and think that it's only for homeless or poor people. Honestly, it's for anyone who is looking to add food to their house if they are having a hard time and can't afford to go to the grocery store." On the next slide, we looked at people's reports of what their experience was like at the food pantry, and we were happy to see that of those who did overcome barriers to using food pantries, those who did go to the food pantry were generally satisfied with their experience. We found that 89% of those who used a pantry reported that they felt welcome, and 89% reported that they would recommend it to others. Similarly, 85% reported that the food has been helpful, and 84% said that the staff speak their language, and 80% noted that food aligns with their cultural beliefs. The lowest level of satisfaction was around not receiving enough food. 66% agreed that the pantry provides, or only 66% agreed that the pantry provides enough food. The quote on the next slide is from a first-time food pantry user living in Worcester. And this he speaks to both the lack of knowledge about what food pantries offer and the satisfaction with the food pantry experience. He shared, "I never realized food pantries supplied fresh fruits and vegetables. Now that comes in handy more than ever." On the next few slides, I'll share a bit of information from our survey about SNAP. As I mentioned earlier, only 1 in 2 adults experiencing food insecurity are enrolled in SNAP in Massachusetts, according to our data. And on the next slide, you can see the reported prevalence of SNAP use, both before and during the pandemic. We found that reported SNAP use increased from 12% to 20%. However, among our survey respondents, there was a fair amount of confusion between PEBT and SNAP, where some people confused PEBT for SNAP and vice versa. So there may be some over-reporting of SNAP use, especially during the pandemic in our data. As with food insecurity and pantry use, we found that SNAP use was highest among people of color and households with children, emphasizing that the pandemic has perpetuated some of the inequalities that already existed with respect to poverty and food insecurity and food access. On the next slide, we have a quote from a mother in Hampden County that speaks to how helpful and necessary the additional federal food assistance benefits have been during the pandemic. This mother shared, "Along with max SNAP benefits and pandemic EBT, at least for a couple of months, we felt food secure. Without both, we still struggle towards the end of the month. We have both been out of work during the pandemic with 3 children at home. It has been a very hard year." Similarly to how we explored some barriers to using food pantries, we also had some questions looking at barriers to SNAP use. Among those who experienced food insecurity but were not using SNAP, we found that the most important barrier was that 78% were worried they were not eligible. The second most common reason for a barrier parallels to what we found as a barrier to food pantry use. 73% reported wanting to support themselves instead. And related to eligibility concerns, 51% reported being worried about the paperwork that they would need to share to access SNAP. On the next slide, we have a quote from a single woman with a graduate degree from Norfolk County that speaks to the stigma and shame that some might feel when using SNAP. She shared, "I just feel like the cashiers might judge me for using SNAP, or my family if they found out." Next, DJ will speak about our programmatic and policy recommendations.
Thanks, Rachel. Thanks for both your amazing work leading this research, but also for highlighting, 2 real critical issues. One around stigma, accessing food assistance, and another on the inequities of food insecurity and food access. On the next slide. Sorry, I'm just moving my people box out of the way. So where do we go from here now that we have this data supporting what we already really knew? Anti-hunger efforts should include, from a programmatic perspective, a public awareness campaign aimed to reduce stigma and share existing resources for food and financial assistance programs, in addition to targeted outreach. This effort should involve multiple sectors, including healthcare, school systems, and retailers. Continuing to develop distribution methods that decrease stigma, like home delivery, offering farmers market style distributions, and curbside distributions where people don't even need to get out of their cars. Promoting equitable data collection and data informed food access investments. The food bank will continue to analyze data on the prevalence of food insecurity among communities of color to really ensure that we're closing the gaps. Enhancing community engagement with communities of color to better ameliorate food insecurity and ensure equitable food distribution, including amplifying voices of diverse individuals seeking help during COVID-19 to mitigate concerns around discrimination, increasing access to bilingual staff or volunteers on site, posters and multilingual materials, ensuring all people know they are welcome and no photo identification is needed at food pantries. Training anti-hunger organization staff and volunteers on implicit bias and how to distribute food in a way that ensures dignity. Now the next slide, our federal and state policy recommendations are to continue supporting the current administration's policy recommendations and changes. Federal and state policies should continue to prioritize funding and extend food and financial assistance policies and infrastructure investments to equitably reduce food insecurity and poverty. Policymakers should continue the elevated funding and increase access to federal programs like TFAP and SNAP and WIC. The key to reducing the gaps in access should include reducing administrative burden and barriers for those applying for benefits. Policymakers should also implement a long-term funding strategy for the continuation of PEBT and universal school meals. In Massachusetts, we need to continue to prioritize funding and increase levels for MEFAP, HIP, and continue to invest in our food assistance infrastructure. In addition, policies aimed to reduce poverty and the burden of unemployment will be key in ensuring equitable economic recovery. So on the next slide, another quote here from a woman who lost one of her jobs, a mother of four from Worcester during the pandemic. She says, food assistance has been enormously helpful because one of my two part-time jobs was eliminated because of COVID. At first it felt strange to use, but it has made up the difference in my lost wages, and we don't have to compromise on what we feed our family. I'm enormously thankful. So to summarize our findings, food insecurity has been steeply on the rise during the pandemic in Massachusetts. People of color and families with children have been disproportionately impacted. Despite the increasing number of people turning to food pantries and SNAP for the first time, only 55% of those experiencing food insecurity were either using food pantries or SNAP. The most common barriers to using either food pantries or SNAP were a desire for self-reliance, sense of stigma, lack of awareness, and concerns about eligibility. Policymakers and hunger relief organizations should strive for more equitable food assistance and promote use of state and federal programs and decrease stigma associated with food insecurity. However, without continued and expanded policies to alleviate poverty, the hunger crisis will continue to plague those most disadvantaged. Thank you. And on the next slide, Rachel did a bit of mining to find some quotes from some Boston residents. I'm not going to read through these. There's a lot of quotes here, but we wanted to make sure to include it in the presentation so that you all received that. And we can actually leave this up on the screen and take questions this time.
Yeah, so same as before, we have about 5 minutes before the next thing in the agenda. So if anyone has any questions, please go ahead and drop them either into the chat or unmute yourself. I actually have a question for you two. I'm curious, how do you recommend, folks that are communicating this data out sort of reconcile the difference in potential like food insecurity rates that are indicated by your research from from broader Feeding America or Census Bureau or USDA data?
So our numbers are higher than Feeding America's estimates. And so I think this is due to various methodological differences between the surveys. One might be due to stigma around answering the surveys. So our data was done anonymously online. We had an online survey, whereas the data from Feeding America, that is from a survey that's done by phone, where through the US Census Bureau, someone who's working for the Census Bureau calls up people and asks them the food insecurity questions. So because they're sensitive, people might be underreporting food insecurity potentially when they're responding by phone versus online. Another potential difference between our data and the Feeding America data is that our data was collected on food insecurity during the pandemic, whereas Feeding America's current estimates are actually projections where they took food insecurity survey data from 2019 because the 2020 data aren't yet available. And then based on sort of relationships that they assume between food insecurity and poverty rate and unemployment rate, they, using mathematical models, they project what they think the food insecurity was in 2020. So that's another methodological reason for the differences. And so the true estimates are probably somewhere between Feeding America's estimates and ours. They're more on the low end and ours are on the high end. And the true estimate of food insecurity might be somewhat similar, but we both find an approximately 50% increase in food insecurity. So that is something that is similar between many of the studies that have been done.
And the racial disparities as well, I'll just add, is something else that researchers just see across the board.
Thank you. That's helpful.
I actually, excuse me, this is Annalise Shepard, Lauren's co-chair of the steering committee. I actually have a question about the rates, particularly of Latinx food insecurity. I'd seen, for example, the city's own data, the state of food insecurity in Boston from, its previous iteration. I suppose that would be data from 2019. And that really lent more toward a 4 times higher rate. I think it might not have been quite as high for Black and African American or African diaspora, but I do remember seeing, a number that was almost 2 times higher than yours for Latinx food insecurity. And so I'm wondering, what do you think those methodological discrepancies may be, and are there is there sort of an in-depth dive look at your methods within the publication, or is that information available online somewhere?
So that's a great question about the difference between that you're finding, or the Boston data has a higher relative level of food insecurity among Latinx. I don't really have an idea why that might be. And if you're interested in our methods, our report doesn't go, our current report, which is on our GBFB website, doesn't go into detail on the methods. We are writing some academic papers that will come out in academic journals. And so those will go more in depth into our methods, but I'll share our email address. So we can also email more information about our methods if you're interested.
Yeah, that would be great, because I think that's, one of the problems that sort of illustrates what we're all seeing, is that there's a huge discrepancy in access to that knowledge, and academic and intellectual integrity is very important. So that would be awesome. Thank you.
Thanks.
One thing I'll note is, our study was for the entire state of Massachusetts. We haven't been able to really get down to that level of detail. We will be starting to look at some county level data in the near future. As far down as we can go, we did 3,000 surveys across the state, so we just need to make sure that the data is representative. But when we do get that Suffolk County data, if we have enough of it, we'll share that back out with this group.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Rachel and DJ, for your time this evening and for sharing this presentation with us. This is super helpful, and I'm sure members of the group, if Suffolk County data does become available, I'm sure folks will be very interested in it. I'll call out that while most BFAC members are city focused, naturally, we do have representation from folks that live, in the counties immediately surrounding as well. So there might be interest there also, but while we focus on the city, we recognize borders are just borders, and the food access is not does not stay on one side of them. So thank you both for your time this evening, and we look forward to hearing more from you in the future. So I'm going to switch back to sharing. Let's see if this works. Hopefully. Nope, that didn't work. Hang on. All right, let's try a different share. I'm going to stop sharing and try a new one. Let's try this. Hopefully this time you can actually see the agenda. Okay, great. So we are actually going to go ahead. I'm going to stop pinning you two to the top of the presentation here. So we're going to go ahead and jump into some breakout rooms. So just to sort of introduce the goals here, we just sort of started the evening off with some federal updates, with statewide updates, and as we continue to sort of hone the agenda in further on sort of local work that we're doing here within BFAC, we just wanted to sort of take a little break in the middle of the meeting and get a chance to get to know who is in the room with us tonight. So for about the next 15 minutes or so, we're going to go ahead and open up some breakout rooms. In each breakout room, we do have a member of the steering committee that can certainly help direct you to where work is happening within BFAC, but I'll just sort of leave you all with a couple questions. One is just, what brings you here tonight? What brings you to BFAC, and what work are you most interested in seeing move forward within BFAC? And the hope here is that the steering committee members that you're in the room with can work to, again, help direct you to where that work is happening within our working groups and within our meetings as well. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and open up all of our rooms. So please go ahead and join your room, and we'll pull you all back in about 15 minutes. Almost everybody back. Okay, I think everybody is back now. So I've gone ahead and started sharing my screen again. So I'm just going to give a quick update on where we are at in nonprofit formation status at BFAC. But just so you all know, so thank you for sharing what you shared in the breakout rooms, and hopefully everyone got a chance to just get a sense of who else is in the room here tonight. We do meet as a steering committee twice each month, and we'll be meeting next week. So we will all be talking about some of what was shared in those conversations and see if there's any sort of takeaways for us that we should be prioritizing. So the next item on the agenda is just, again, a quick update. We agreed a few months ago at the steering committee level that one of the best next steps for us at Boston Food Access Council is to pursue nonprofit formation. As of right now, we are sort of an unincorporated entity that meets. We have bylaws, but we are not officially a nonprofit with the state of Massachusetts, nor are we, a 501c3 with the IRS or really any sort of status with either of those. So, so we've decided to start that process, and I just wanted to share that we have acquired some pro bono legal counsel, and we are working with them to both review our bylaws and also review our options for the next steps in this process. Most likely what will happen is that we will pursue fiscal sponsorship while we sort of form as a nonprofit within the state of Massachusetts, and that we will stay within fiscal sponsorship up until a point where the resources that we have fundraised or the size of the organization hits a point that it is more fiscally responsible to pursue 501c3 status on our own and take on some of those responsibilities that a fiscal sponsor might work with us on. I won't spoil too much about what Nicole is going to share in the fundraising working group update, but that group is working to review some various fiscal sponsor agencies to determine what might be a good option for BFAC as we pursue this next step in that process. And I'm happy to just sort of ask, if any of you have experience working with a fiscal sponsor and there are folks that you would recommend and you want to share that information with us, please go ahead and reach out. You can either, again, drop it in the chat, or you can reach us at bostonfoodaccesscouncil@gmail.com. But that is sort of where we are at from the nonprofit formation status. So we expect this to take at least a few more months before we are able to either receive financial donations or really start asking for support from grantors or other supporters. So that is where we stand, and I'm happy to take any questions on that before we move on to working group updates. But again, the fundraising working group update will touch on this a bit as well. All right, well then we can move on into our working group updates for the evening. So this evening we will be sharing updates from each of the 4 working groups within BFAC. For those of you who are not familiar with the Boston Food Access Council structure, we have an open membership network, which is open to anyone that is interested in working on these issues. We have a 9-member elected steering committee who we introduced at the top of the meeting. And then we have 4 working groups. They're named here on the slide. And the steering committee has the ability to form or dissolve working groups as we see fit. But right now, we're going to hear from the chairs or co-chairs of those working groups and hear what they are working on. And I will just sort of call out that the steering committee is really here to provide the administrative and infrastructure support for Boston Food Access Council, but the working groups is very much where that work happens. When we talk about the goals of increasing food access in the city of Boston and the various ways in which we are hoping to do that through BFAC, it's very much through the working groups that work happens. And so I always encourage folks that are joining us here this evening to listen to what folks are working on in these working groups and engage with them as they meet monthly and we meet quarterly at the public level. So with that, I will stop talking and turn it over to Sarah from the Policy and Advocacy Co-Chair.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, no camera tonight. Thank you for joining us this evening. We appreciate the time and talent shared by the members of BFAC. New members are always welcome to join all of our working groups, as Lauren said. So if you are interested in learning more, definitely feel free to reach out to us. I just placed my email address in the chat box. Tonight, I would like to warmly welcome my new co-chair, Chloe Miller. Chloe is a passionate food system advocate with close to 6 years of experience working in different aspects of the U.S. food system and nutrition programs. She's currently earning her master's degree in public health at Boston University, so she can further advance food policy by connecting the work of advocates in climate change action, nutrition, and public health to create sustainable change in structural racism and inequities in the food system. So Chloe, thank you so much for volunteering your time. And since the last BFAC quarterly meeting, the BFAC Policy and Advocacy Working Group continues to monitor and advocate for food system, food-related health, and agricultural policies on a state and federal level. In order to advocate for city policies which increase food access, improve conditions for farmers, and support the organizations within our state and local food system, our working group would like to invite all of the Boston mayoral candidates to meet with us for nonpartisan discussion about the Boston area food system and where they stand on pertinent issues related to food and food-related health and agriculture. This will also provide us an opportunity to educate our candidates about Boston's concerns and needs related to these issues. And in doing this, we'll hopefully create pathways to improve policy, practices, and even public investments in our local food system. We'll continue planning this at our next working group meeting on June 8th. Definitely reach out to us if you are interested in helping with this initiative, or if you'd simply like to attend the meetings. One of our working group's objectives is to support Massachusetts farmers and challenges around Article 89. We wish to bring their voices to the table and to identify ways to advocate for them as a food system community. Members of our working group from the agricultural community will be collaborating on developing a strategy to improve our impact in this area. So stay tuned. And again, if you want to join the conversation, reach out. I was asked for an update on advocacy for DTA office reopenings. BFAC has been trying to identify opportunities to advocate for the reopening of these important offices. The Massachusetts Law Reform Institute, the SNAP Coalition, and the Office of Food Access have been our best resources for updates. And we're grateful to them for their vital advocacy to see these offices open their doors again and for improvement of access to services online and via telephone. Thanks to the advocacy work of MLRI and the SNAP Coalition, the DTA assistance line has been updated in order to improve customer service, and DTA offices will reopen with technology kiosks later this month. It may be better to defer to a member of one of these organizations to provide a more thorough update on the DTA office reopenings. But BFAC will continue to monitor the DTA office reopenings and will advocate for continued progress in this area. Lastly, for those of you on our Slack channel, we will continue to share occasional resources, member advocacy initiatives, and advocacy training opportunities. If you're not on our Slack channel but would like to join, please reach out to Lauren Palumbo, Annalise Shepard, or myself. Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you, Sarah. Before we move on to the next group, does anyone have any questions for Sarah and Chloe in the work that's being done in the policy and advocacy group? Okay. All right, well, with that, we'll move on to the Community Outreach, Engagement, and Education Working Group. I'm going to start off by introducing Joy, who has been serving as an interim co-chair for quite longer than the title interim might have indicated. So first, just thank you to Joy for shepherding this group over the past year plus. As a member of the steering committee. And then Joy will also introduce our new co-chairs as well. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Joy.
Thank you, Lauren. So yeah, again, my name is Joy Gary, and I do want to introduce two of our co-chairs, one of which is not available tonight, Orlena McQueen, but No Finger is online, and she'll probably just give a wave if she is visible. I can't see the screen at the moment, but both our new co-chairs are quite active in the community, doing lots of outreach and engagement in other spheres, and have been introduced to BFAC through the EBFE process. And so they're really excited about coming on board and are in the process of transitioning into taking on full leadership of the role. So this will be the last time that I'm presenting, and going forward, you'll see them lead the charge. So a couple of updates for our committee. We, over the past few months, one, developed a work plan for the rest of the year, and to make sure that we're staying on time and on task on some of the objectives that we have for the year, and have produced that, and that is available. It is available via our our drive. So we can make that link available to everyone if you're interested in knowing like what exactly are we going to be doing at each meeting. One of the changes that we have made to our meeting time and structure is to extend it for an hour and a half, so that we will be working on those our specific objectives during each meeting. And the two objectives that we are working on were drawn out of the EBFE goals. One was to strengthen the citywide food access network by providing resources and supporting community initiatives. And then the second is building public awareness of food insecurity and available resources, programs, and services through communication. In order to support those, we are developing or are spending time to develop our communication strategy overall for BFAC. And so in our last meeting, we had a bit of a training to go through the steps to know what exactly would our communication strategy look like. And we have a preliminary draft and plan. If you're interested in helping us with communications, if you're interested in outreach and sort of drafting and thinking and visioning around how should we present BFAC to one, to ourselves, and then externally to the community, feel free to join us. We have meetings every third Tuesday from 6:30 to 8:00 p.m. And our next meeting is the next Tuesday, June 15th from 6:30 to 8:00 p.m.
Great. Thank you, Joy. And thank you, Nono. We're glad you're here tonight. Does anyone have any questions for Joy, for Nono and the COEE group, which is how we shorten it because it is a mouthful? All right, well then, thank you for that update, Joy, and we look forward to hearing from the new co-chairs at our next public meeting in September. So I'm going to go ahead and ask Nicole, one of our steering committee members who's here representing the fundraising group, to share updates from that group.
Thanks, Lauren. Hi, everyone. My name is Nicole St. Louis. Since the last public meeting, the fundraising working group made a presentation to the steering committee describing the different organizational and legal structures that are available to BFAC. After that presentation, they then reached out to Suffolk Law Clinic to gather more information on what the formation process looks like, and also connected with folks at the Los Angeles Food Policy Council, as well as Massachusetts Farm to School, to learn more about fiscal sponsorship and what their experiences have been as they grew and are continuing to grow. Since then, as Lauren just mentioned, we have been connected with a firm to start the formation process, which is really exciting. The group is now looking into a few potential fiscal sponsors that align with BFAC and what their different processes and applications look like. And they will be presenting those findings shortly to the steering committee. The fundraising group is also looking for new co-chairs. Our two current chairs are stepping down after an amazing year as they're both moving out of state. So we are looking for people that are interested in leading the group. You do not have to have professional fundraising experience to be a chair. So if anyone here is interested or would like to learn more, please reach out to us. We're happy to answer any questions or connect and chat about the opportunity. Paul Garabedian, who's one of the chairs, is happy to talk with anyone that is interested in the opportunity or has questions about what we've done in the past year.
Great, thanks, Nicole. And I will just echo that Annalise and I, as co-chairs of the steering committee, are also happy to speak with anyone about what our sort of expectations are for folks serving in the co-chair role. So you can, as Megan just included in the chat, you can email us at bostonfoodaccesscouncil@gmail.com to reach to reach us and ask any questions that you might have. We're definitely hoping to find some new folks to take the baton from the outgoing co-chairs and move this work forward, because it is certainly very important to achieving our future goals within BFAC. So, thanks, Nicole. And then finally, I am turning it over to Hye-Yeon Kim from the Office of Food Access and Christine Becker, who both serve as co-chairs of our fourth working group, which is Mayor's Food Access Agenda Working Group. And you both should have presenting abilities. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen so that you can take over the screen share.
Thank you so much. I can go ahead and share. There you go. All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Hye-Yeon. I'm one of the co-chairs for the Mayor's Food Access Agenda Working Group. And then I know that Christine is also on. So I'm going to kick things off. We have a couple of things to go over, but no, we don't have a lot of time. So just to set the scene, I just want to start off by saying thank you to the Equitable Boston Food Ecosystem Project. The Office of Food Access contracted with Health Leads last year to do an assessment of the food security in Boston citywide. And it was just really comprehensive, and Health Leads was able to connect with over 100 individuals and 10 organizations. And the recommendations that came out of that informed our food access agenda, which was published in April. And I'm happy to share that link after if folks haven't seen it. And the Mayor's Food Access Agenda is working group is going to work off of this agenda and just work with community members to move forward on certain goals, which Christine will talk more about.
Okay, yeah, sorry about that. I wanted to make sure I was unmuted. Hello, everyone. As Hye-Yeon mentioned, I'm Christine Becker. Hye-Yeon, could you click on this, on the link? Does it auto-populate the, let's see, okay. I don't know if we can enlarge the view.
I might be sharing, 1 second.
Yeah, it's okay.
Does that work?
So yeah, it's okay. We'll just, if you'll just scroll down, I mean, essentially this is a very high level view of there's goal. So there's not actually 6 goals. That's a little deceiving, as it says goal 1, 2, 3, 4, and 6. But as Hye-Yeon mentioned, in the mayor's agenda goals, these are the strategic ones from what I understand that the steering committee has looked at, and this is what we're hoping to adopt as a working group. And so as many of you may or may not know, we're actually going to be kicking off our first meeting, which is really exciting. So there's a Zoom link that'll be on the next page. An invite will be sent out to all working group members for the Mayor's Food Access Agenda through Airtable. So if you've indicated that you want to be part of the working group, just know that you'll have this link also sent to you. But if you'll earmark that our kickoff meeting is the 23rd, and we'll discuss the goals that you really couldn't read because it was so small, but that'll be included in the invitation. And so we're just asking everyone to kind of peruse through those, begin to think about what sparks interest, and we'll go into breakout groups in our first meeting, talk about meeting norms, get to know one another so that we can kind of build cohesion as a group. And then we'll officially vote on what will be adopting as a strategy in our July meeting. And so June 23rd, 6 to 7 p.m., as you can see here. And then, like I said, if you're on Airtable, we'll send out an invite this Sunday, the 6th. But we hope that you would join us. We're really excited about working together to build an equitable food system. Do you have another slide, Hye-Yeon?
Great, I do.
Okay.
Can folks see that next slide? Okay, great. Great, and then the last thing we want to talk about was share this opportunity that we're opening up to community members. the Office of Food Access is going to launch some community grants later this summer, but we're hoping to recruit community members to be on the grant review committee to help inform what the grant will look like, and also like ultimately select what organizations or proposals will be funded. So we'll send all this out in an email, but considerations include lived experience with food insecurity, Boston resident, BFAC member, and just ability to participate in the whole grant process. The dates for the application to become part of the grant review committee is June 2nd through June 11th. The link is listed here, but we'll send that out and I'll drop in the chat. And again, the opportunity is paid and there'll be 2 rounds. So we'll recruit for a review committee for this round, and then in a couple of months, we'll have another round that goes out. So if this summer is tight for folks, there'll be another opportunity later, but definitely please feel free to share this information. We're really excited about it and really looking for just community input throughout the whole process. Great, and then there's our contact information. Please let us know if you're interested in the working group or the grant review committee, and we're really hoping to just chat more in the future. Great.
Thank you both. Does anyone, I know that's some really good information in there. So are there any follow-up questions for Han and Christine before we move forward? Okay. All right. Well, if anyone isn't sure if they are on a working group's email list, you can definitely click that link that Megan just dropped in, which is our sort of membership form, but it also gives you an opportunity to indicate which working groups you are interested in. And again, if you have any follow-up questions, you can contact Han and Christine at their contact information, which has also just been shared. Or if you have broader questions about working groups or anything else BFAC related, you can reach us at the Boston Food Access Council at gmail.com. So I am going to share my screen again. All right. So hopefully y'all can see that. I'm gonna skip through. Okay, so we now have folks from Project Bread that are here to share some updates. Miriam, are you here and are you able to unmute yourself?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
We can. Awesome. All right. So I'll do my best to wrangle the slides, but if I'm not catching up, please just flag it for me and I will move it forward.
Awesome. Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Miriam. I am the Assistant Director of Program Communications at Project Bread. And so tonight I will do my best to go quickly, but just wanted to share some information about some of the awareness campaigns that we've been doing since the beginning of the pandemic. And I think this ties in really nicely to the research that the Greater Boston Food Bank shared earlier, as Rachel and Daniel mentioned in their research recommendations. You know, we know that awareness is a hugely critical component in helping families and individuals access food assistance. And, you know, last year due to the pandemic, we were really seeing through our direct service work on our food source hotline and from our school meal partners and really from all of the partners that we work with, that people struggling to afford food were either inundated with lists of places to call or websites to visit, to the point where they were almost overwhelmed with so many options, or they didn't know where to turn for support. And this was especially true for the many individuals who had never had to seek food assistance prior to the pandemic. You know, they just didn't know where to start in finding food assistance. And so our objective was really to connect individuals and households with the resources they needed, primarily focusing on expanding access to federal nutrition programs like SNAP and school meals. So if you want to go ahead to the next slide, you know, really we were focusing on the immediate and ongoing response to the increased need and changes driven by the pandemic. Obviously, this was a completely new landscape for everyone. and really help to increase awareness and usage of these federal nutrition programs among eligible individuals. And then finally, really normalize needing help. So there's a lot of stigma around seeking food assistance, and we wanted to make sure that everyone knew that this is, you know, a totally normal, this is, you know, everyone needs help sometimes, and make this something that is just normal and acceptable to do. And as Vicki mentioned earlier, Project Bread's Food Source Hotline can connect families with emergency food programs, but we can also help people apply for SNAP or find school or summer meal sites near them. We can answer questions about PBT and provide other information about federal assistance programs. So we really wanted to help direct folks to kind of a one-stop resource to find assistance near them and hopefully reduce some of that overwhelm. And so our approach was really, first and foremost, we wanted it to be community informed. So we worked with some of the folks on this call. We worked with the Boston Office of Food Access. We worked with the Office of Immigrant Advancement, as well as schools and community partners across the state to get feedback and help distribute resources and information. And other partners like DESE and DTA were hugely critical in helping share information as well. And then knowing that different communities access information in different ways, we really wanted to utilize and incorporate multiple angles to help the campaign be a little bit more accessible. And so the three main points that we used targeted digital advertising, out-of-home advertising, and then organic outreach through partners. And so just quickly, the three of those points, for digital and mobile, we were able to target ads to very specific groups. So for example, we were able to target job seekers or people that had searched for food resources online. And so this really allowed us to access the people most likely to be interested in these resources, and why many people never saw our ads and never knew that this was running, but it was helping to really target the folks most likely to want food assistance. And then our out of home was including billboards and transit advertising, and these were put in key communities statewide. And one of the biggest, we really launched this awareness effort with the Boston Office of Food Access in Boston on a large scale SNAP campaign. And so we had billboards and transit advertising, bus shelter advertising in multiple communities in Boston. And then we also mailed out over 1 million postcards to households statewide across our various campaigns. And then while the other two options were really paid advertising, we also really utilized the extensive network of partners like the folks on this call to share resources and increase awareness and engage households at a grassroots level. And so if you want to just, you can go ahead and quickly scroll through the next few slides, but these are just some examples of some of the creative and awareness efforts that we did throughout this campaign. Awesome. And then this is just a list of the outreach materials that we have available. We offered to partners and we currently have available on our website. And this list of languages is actually a little bit old. I think we have 10 or 11 languages that our materials are available in now. And so just quickly, if you want to go to the next slide, we've seen, I won't go through all of this, but we have seen, a huge impact just from raising awareness. And so really do encourage sharing resources and information, because that is so critical to helping families access resources. And we, in the future have no plans to stop these awareness efforts. And now as things go back to this new normal, we really want to use awareness as a way to promote an equitable recovery and help connect families and individuals with these resources in an ongoing way. Because we know that, the normal prior to the pandemic was still not good enough for many, many families in Boston and statewide. And so if you want to just quickly go to the next slide, just looking ahead, we are planning to do more engagement in additional languages. So really, I think that's one of the things that we've been trying, and would love for, if any folks on this call have any thoughts, and just, really, we want to reach as many folks as possible. And we know that there's a lot of folks that English is not their first language, or there's other avenues, you know, beyond just digital. And I think there's a lot of word of mouth outreach that can be done, and other avenues to do awareness. And we really want to help tap into some of those to reach as wide a group of folks as possible. And, you know, along with that, just seeing kind of what tactics worked the best for different audiences. And then as we move through the year, coming up is summer meals. So Summer Eats in Massachusetts provides free meals for kids and teens 18 and under. So we'll be doing a large scale campaign around that over the next few months. And then, you know, we have no plans to stop. So really, as much as possible, continuing to spread awareness about these resources. And on that note, I just wanted to plug our website, projectbread.org/resources, has a bunch of printable resources, digital, social resources in multiple languages. And so really would, you know, encourage folks, if you are interested, to check that out and share some of that information to help folks find information. And then just the last thing that I wanted to mention tonight on the note of summer. So Boston Summer Eats is, again, it provides free meals to kids and teens 18 and under when school is out. And so we worked really closely with the Boston Office of Food Access for a number of years on Boston Summer Eats. And OFA is offering Boston Summer Eats grants to community organizations in Boston who are interested in hosting a summer meal site this year. And so there are grants ranging from $1,000 to $4,000 available for interested organizations. And if you are interested, applications are due by June 11th, and the link can be found on this slide, but I can also drop that in the chat for anyone who is interested. And I think that is it for me, but I'm happy to answer any questions. And I can also share my email in case anyone has questions.
Thanks, Miriam. Yeah, let's open it up. Are there any questions from the audience? And again, you can either drop them in the chat or you can unmute yourself.
Hello, it's Nono. So the Summer Eats program, the grant, is that like if the person was to go with it, what is the funding for? Like, is it for the food? Like, what's it for? And then, like, is it like a specific amount of days that a community like Spot has to give out the food?
That's a great question. And I'm actually not positive on the amount of days. But so the funding, the food is
okay. I am eating. Like, oh.
The food is funded through the federal summer food service program. So the funding is not for that, but it would be for things like staffing, for engagement activities, for things that would help you run a site during the summer months. But if you're interested, let me drop my information in the chat and you can shoot me an email. And I'm actually not the contact person for this, but I can direct you to someone who would be able to answer your questions.
This is Hayan. I can jump into, so with regards to the number of days, the funding is in relationship to how many days that you are serving food. So I think it's mostly flexible for organizations. So if you want to do one day, then you can do whatever day works for your organization, but you might get like a smaller stipend. And like totally like Miriam said, it's to support staffing. And I believe that outreach materials are provided too, but the food is free and is that's included as part of the partnership.
Thanks, Anne.
Thank you.
Other questions?
So I know that this grant is limited to the city of Boston, obviously, but are there any similar programs working in Cambridge or Somerville, or you know, outside of Boston proper that y'all are aware of? I don't know if your scope of operations is limited to exclusively the city of Boston or not.
Off the top of my head, I am not sure of any opportunities, but if you do want to reach out to me, I can check in with some colleagues and see if there's anything that they know of.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Miriam. This is super helpful. And again, these slides will be shared out following the meeting in an email. As long as you're on our mailing list, you will receive both the slides from tonight's presentations as well as a link to the YouTube video, which will be uploaded this week. So stay tuned for that. And I guess I'll just sort of, before we move on to the sort of final portion of the meeting, are there any other questions? I don't believe that all of our presenters from the evening are still here tonight, but are there any other questions for BFAC or folks who are here in the room? We just have like 2 extra minutes here that I want to offer up for folks. Okay, well, questions are always available to be answered via email, or you can reach us on social media and a few other ways as well. So I am just here to sort of wind down the meeting and share some next steps with everybody. So some of these are sort of action items that you can specifically take, or they're ways that you can stay engaged or get engaged with BFAC. So the first thing to note is I would ask everyone to sort of put on their calendar that our next public meeting, if you're not noticing the trend, our public meetings occur on the first Wednesday of the month in March, June, September, and December. So our next public meeting is Wednesday, September 1st from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. I will say that I think we previously assumed that all of our meetings this year would be on Zoom. I will acknowledge that we have the possibility of doing an in-person meeting, but I think a lot of what we've learned from this past 15 months is that the ability and accessibility of public meetings is maybe a bit broader when we are able to do it from anywhere. So I think that's a conversation that we will continue to have as a steering committee. But again, if you have any thoughts, please feel free to drop us a note about preferences that you might have. We've shared a link a couple times, but again, if you're interested in joining a working group, our Airtable is where we store all of our membership information. And so that link that Megan just dropped in the chat is both our membership form as well as a place where you can indicate which working groups that you heard from tonight you're interested in. There's no limit to the number of working groups you want to can choose to engage with. They all meet once a month. So it certainly can be a lot of meetings, but certainly indicate what you're interested in and you'll end up on their mailing list. And so then you'll get their meeting invitations and other updates from those chairs. And again, you can email us if you are interested in joining the fundraising group as a co-chair or other leadership roles. Please just feel free to reach out to us and we're happy to chat further. We do have a variety of social media channels. We have a new Facebook page. So if any of you were previous followers of our Facebook group or members of our Facebook group, in the best interest of social media practices, we did disband the Facebook group and we moved over to a Facebook page a few months ago. So make sure that you are liking our page to get our updates there. We also have a Twitter account and an Instagram handle, so you can find us at the links which Megan just dropped into the chat. That same form that we shared earlier, again, is also the membership form. So whether you're indicating membership interest or working group interest, you'll end up in the same place now. Another call to action that we wanted to share out, this is a broader appeal, but if you're not familiar with it, Congressman McGovern has taken his position as the chair of the Rules Committee in Congress to engage in some important conversations around food insecurity and food access, and to learn more from folks with lived experience or with folks who are working on the ground to address these issues that have innovative ideas or solutions. So the link that Megan just shared is the call to action form where you can go ahead and share either your personal story, you can share a solution that you would like to sort of present or put forward. And they are reviewing those in his office and within the staff of the Rules Committee. and continuing to have hearings on these issues and looking to really just hear from folks that have good stories or that have solutions to share in the effort of what they're working on. And then the final thing that I have to plug for the evening is that, as I mentioned at the top of the meeting, our sort of winter/spring intern Megan is winding down with us this month, and so we are hoping to bring on a new intern, preferably as soon as possible, to provide some overlap with Megan. So if you or someone you know can commit about 8 to 12 hours over the course of each week between June and September before we bring on a winter intern or fall/winter, please do reach out. Megan just popped the document that sort of covers the job description as well as how to apply. It's pretty straightforward, but please take a look. And again, please feel free to share that if you think you know someone that is maybe has some time this summer and is interested in getting engaged in food access work. It's certainly a great opportunity to engage with a number of leaders in the food access space throughout the city of Boston and beyond. And so we hope to hear from someone soon or multiple someones, and we'll be connecting with each of them about their candidacy. And that is everything that we have to share this evening. I will sort of keep this running for another minute or two in case anyone has any questions or follow-up comments. But we definitely want to thank everyone for making the time tonight. I know after a rainy and cold Memorial Day weekend, the turn in weather is prompting everyone to go get outside. So thank you for spending a little bit of time with us today and this evening to talk about a variety of food access issues throughout the city, the state, and at the federal policy level as well.
I couldn't have said it
Hey,
any
Lauren.
better, Lauren. Thank you so much, everybody.
Lauren, I have a question.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
I can. Oh, I
McGovern,
can't
the
see who
Congressman
it is.
McGovern, the stuff of the call to action or sharing your stories, do you know anyone that's connected to that? Or we tried to submit the stuff about the neighborhood work that's happening for Dorchester, Mattapan, and Hyde Park and Rosendale, and it couldn't take any size of any kind of attachment. And so I'm not really sure if it was even going through.
Shoot me an email and I do have a contact there
Okay.
that we might be able to get it sent over to.
Okay, all right, sounds good. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Jen.
Thanks, Lauren.
Thank you, Sarah.